Welcome back to another Wordy Wednesday. Yes, Audie is here with us. He is sound asleep right behind me. I imagine once he figures out what's going on, he's going to wake up and make his presence known. But for the moment, we have a cat-free video. Yay. Well, today we're going to talk about some word pairs of all kinds. Things that I suspect a lot of you may be having trouble with. Some things that are probably pairs that you didn't realize. So, stick around and we will get right into it. Okay, let's just plunge right in to our first pair. Lose and loose. Okay, now loose means the opposite of tight. In other words, something that hangs freely is loose. Lose, of course, means to leave something behind, to fail to win. So, we have these two words. Why are they difficult? Well, because lose is L-O-S-E. Loose is L-O-O-S-E. Now, loose makes sense to us because we have goose, we have moose, so we can look at that and say, okay, that's loose, that's great. But what about lose with that Z sound? Why is it we have that problem? Very easy, because there is one other word that ends in that O-O-S-E that is not pronounced with the soft S. It's pronounced with the Z, and it's more commonly used than moose or goose, and that is choose. So, choose, C-H-O-O-S-E. So our mind says lose, L-O-O-S-E. They rhyme, they should be spelled alike. No. The easiest way to deal with this is just memorize it. Be a chooser, not a loser. So C-H-O-O-S-E-R and loser, not L-O-S-E-R. So we know that the double O in choose, and we're negating that with lose. That's the only mnemonic I have for you for this one. This is amazingly common. People will often look at words like L-O-S-E, lose, and they look at it and say, oh, well, I'm pretty sure that's not lose, because that O-S-E sound is like rose or hose. What happened here is the great vowel shift. And the great vowel shift is this wonderful thing that happened to the English language relatively quickly. It was a period of about 150 years that totally turned our pronunciations upside down, changed virtually every vowel sound. I say virtually. It did not change all vowel sounds. Most of the very commonly used words retained their older pronunciation, because when a word is used in common everyday speech, it's in your head, it's in your mouth, you're spitting it out, it's in your ears because you're hearing it. So words that are really, really common tend not to change easily. They're very change resistant because they're in such constant use. Change is much more likely to take place in less commonly used words. So, choose, very common, and it probably kept that older sound. Loose, of course, conforms to that O-O-S-E spelling. So that's a little bit of information about the Y. And sometimes the Y is very helpful in self-correcting. When you see that, just remember there was a massive vowel shift. So we have lose, L-O-S-E, which of course we would say is lows, because again, lose being common didn't get itself affected by the vowel shift as much. Now, most of these words did at least a little, but not as much as hose or rose or other words that were just not at the tips of our tongues every day back when this happened. But very, very common. Now the next two, quiet and quieten. You might not be familiar with quieten. That is a legitimate English word. It's more commonly used in Great Britain. It was more commonly used in the past. But let me explain the difference. Obviously, you know what quiet means. It means the absence of noise. So if you're talking about me, you just look at me and say, you be quiet. There you go. Simple. But what if you want me to quiet someone else? Now, that's not how it works. I do not quiet the dog or quiet the baby or quiet, the guy next door. I quieten them. That is the actual word. So, is go quiet the dog wrong? Probably not. And the reason it's probably not wrong is because it's so commonly used. And as we know, language is constantly changing. And if you use a word incorrectly, and that's how this started, you use it incorrectly often enough, eventually your incorrect usage will become correct. But you want to be precise. You want to stick your nose in the air and say, I know more about grammar than you do. You be quiet, you quieten the dog. And you can get very snooty about that one. Here we go. This is going to be two different pairs of words. Common and mutual is our first pair. So, common and mutual. What do they have in common? What if I said we have a common friend? Now, I would be speaking properly. You and I have a friend in common because common means shared. Mutual does not. Mutual means reciprocal. So, when you and I both share a friend, now remember, the word common comes from the same root as community, commonplace, commonwealth. For those of you from New England, Boston Common, which was the commonly held grounds, and it all goes back to the concept of shared by the populace. So, the friend that we share is a common friend. We don't say that, though. We say we have a mutual friend. So, some of you have already figured out why. I know you have. Because common has another meaning. And that other meaning, now we're switching over to common and vulgar. Common has a meaning very similar to that of vulgar. That meaning is crass, unrefined. So you wouldn't say, our mutual friend is common. We have a common friend suggests we have a friend not in common, but rather that the friend is a very common sort of person, very vulgar and unrefined. He's no gentleman. So let's look at common and vulgar. Vulgar is basically the same. Vulgar originally meant the common people, pertaining to the masses. So you will have expressions like the vulgar tongue. People speak about Dante, for example, and say, well, Dante was great because he wrote in the vulgar tongue. He wrote in the Italian people were speaking as opposed to Latin. And in fact, if you think Dante was great, that's probably the only reason you have to hang your hat on, because I do not feel, my personal opinion, that Dante's works have held up. They are not only incomprehensible, but completely morally irrelevant today. So, but vulgar had that same origin, common. And this is why we do not use common to describe our friend, because of the negative associations, and why vulgar and common have the same sort of meaning. And this is really interesting. This is why I've set vulgar and common up as a pair, because they are words that originally meant the same thing, the masses, the common people. One came from the concept of shared, and the other came from the concept of the populace. Still, they took on the same meaning, and then they took on virtually the same negative connotation. I would say a vulgar friend is probably a little more offensive than a common friend, but it's the same thing. Not refined, not genteel. So that's another pair, but it's a pair you probably didn't realize were a pair. And remember, both common and vulgar come from that pool of people, the masses. And we in the U.S. have common, the concept in 4 states, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Kentucky, plus Puerto Rico, which is also a commonwealth. It's not the same sort of commonwealth. In the UK, it's a much more common word, because they even have the House of Commons. And frankly, when I think about something like the House of Commons, what comes to my mind is a bungalow full of bubbas in T-shirts with beer saying, yeah, let's go tailgating. That's what a House of Commons is to me. But you can see from the House of Commons that it came from the common people, just as vulgar came from the common people. But to get back to our original pair, this is why, even though the word mutual has a different definition, and it is not the definition that we intend, because if we speak of a mutual friend, remember, mutual means reciprocal. That means I am his friend, he is my friend, and in many ways we would consider that redundant, because let's face it, we all hope our friendships are reciprocal, and even if they aren't, we like to think they are. So the idea of a mutual friend is really, you want to get technical about it, it's saying I'm his friend, he's my friend. And if we say John and I have a mutual friend, that suggestion of reciprocity would indicate that John and I have an equal sort of relationship with the friend, which we don't mean to imply when we say we have a mutual friend. It could be John's very best friend and a slight acquaintance of ours, but we can't use the word common because it insults the friend. So we've thrown in a deliberately wrong word instead. So I, frankly, am giving you permission to abuse the word mutual, because it is ever so much better than suggesting that our friend is crass and vulgar. Pray and pray. P-R-E-Y, victim, pray, to supplicate, to beg. I made that mistake just this morning. I started to type a comment. This was on the video about scammers, and I was saying they're preying upon, and I started writing P-R-A-Y. I caught myself, but that is the spelling of prey that immediately came to my mind. So, pray and pray. Keep those straight. Two different words, and a lot of people don't even realize that. To supplicate, to beg, to pray for a favor, that sort of thing, P-R-A-Y. Pray, as in victim, is P-R-E-Y, has its own spelling. And it's interesting because we have another word pair that does that, gray and gray. You can spell gray, G-R-E-Y. That is an older spelling. It's considered more a British spelling than an American spelling, but they are both still legitimately that color somewhere between black and white. As far as the mnemonic, I would just ask you to keep prayer in mind, P-R-A-Y-E-R, which means a supplication, and it comes from prayer, the one who prays. So we might be able to hold it in our head that way. But pray as in the victim. For the bad little cat this morning, it was a squirrel. It's the first time he's ever caught a squirrel. Brought it home. He wanted to bring it in the house. He was so proud. It's like, look, Mom, I brought you breakfast. I had to run. I was in my bathrobe and slippers, and I had to run across the yard to get him to let go of that squirrel. Poor little thing ran up a tree. I brought Audie in the house. He was a little disappointed, but he figured out right away I was not letting him keep the squirrel, and that's why he ran off. It's like, no, I'm keeping the squirrel. I try very hard not to let him harm the harmless little animals. Vermin he can get rid of, but when he goes after chipmunks, squirrels, bunnies, I'm just not thrilled about that. So that could be why he's asleep. He could still be sulking about his squirrel, but he definitely wanted to bring it inside, and he's usually pretty good about just, bringing it to the door and leaving it and not trying to bring it in. But this time, I guess he thought we were going to sit at the table and enjoy the squirrel breakfast together this morning. Oh, no, thank you. Now, our last pair, and this one is fascinating for me because I studied it before I ever came across it in the flesh, and that is let and leave. Let and leave in southern Pennsylvania are used interchangeably. For a long time, I thought there were limits to the interchange, that they would use it the way a lot of us use it. Leave him alone, let him alone, leave that be, let it be. Leave it on the table, let it on the table. I've actually heard people say, I let the party early. Or, whatever the version of leave was, let's let the party early, meaning leave. For the people around here, it is 100% interchangeable, and they defer to let instead of leave. This is, in many cases, a grammatical error, not in all cases. Okay, look, I'm right here. All right. Not in all cases, but in many cases it is. Obviously, you don't let a party early. You leave a party early. You don't let something on a table. You leave it on a table. So how does something like this happen? This is where we get into a little bit of history. We have word pairs. Let and leave are one of them. Others, and I'm sure many of them will come to mind, safe and sound, hale and hearty. These pairs of words come to us from the time of the Norman conquest. And the reason for this is 1066, most of us know the story. I was about to say everybody knows the story, but most of us know it. 1066, William the Bastard gets on his boat, comes over to England, attacks the country, and Harold had to make a forced march from the north of England because the British had, well, they were not British then, they were English, had just been attacked like 3 weeks earlier. It was like real, and in those days 3 weeks was like, because it was so hard to get across, had to force march across from the other side of the country because a crazy Viking prince named Tostig had decided he was the rightful heir of England and managed to get a Danish prince to help him with an unsuccessful invasion. So Harold managed to stave off one invasion, but he could not handle both at the same time. Yes, all right. And William won out. So all of a sudden, Britain becomes French. And when I say that, what I mean is that Britain's nobility, William and his entourage, were French. They brought over their language and their customs, and court documents went overnight from being written in English to being written in French. Well, that lasted for a couple hundred years, and then the situation changed. And obviously we know this because we speak English and not French. A small ruling class cannot really impose their language on other people. That's done through different methods. It's through land development, settlement. Frankly, the Vikings, when they were constantly trading and occasionally invading England, managed to have a much greater impact on the English language long term because of the business relationships. In order to transact business, the Vikings took English, stripped it down, and used essential words. They dropped case endings, they dropped gender, all kinds of things like that. And so we owe them a much more simplified language, which is what we have today. However, back to William and his cronies. When documents came to be written in English again, this is a couple hundred years after William, they started writing them in both French and English. And that's where these pairs come from. You will have hail and hearty, safe and sound, let and leave. One will be the Anglo-Saxon word, the other will be the French word. And they join up in pairs, and they survive. A lot of them survived because they were part of a standard format for legal documents. Let and leave is one of those. And the connection between let and leave is allow. So I let you go to the store. I permit you to go to the store. I allow you to go to the store. I give you my leave to go to the store. So even though we do not these days think of the word leave as denoting permission or allowing someone to do something, that was the original definition. So that's where the connection is. And you can see that, as I say, by your leave. You watch old movies about, medieval times, and they're always saying things like that. And I have the king's leave to do this. Obviously, it doesn't mean I have the king walking out the door to do this. It means I have the king's permission. So that was it. The let and leave had that connection. Around here, the connection is unbelievable. Like I say, letting a party early is really striking. I love it because I get to watch it. And as I say, I've studied it and now I see it in action. I did not originally believe the words were 100% interchangeable, but having lived among people who do this, I can tell you absolutely they are. I think for a lot of people there are limits to how far they will carry this, but there are some people who just pretty much don't acknowledge that lead is a word. Just like for them, it's all let. So that was an interesting one. Now, I want to conclude with a very quick little grammatical mistake. Now, I'm going to read this to you because this was from that same email exchange I mentioned earlier when I was speaking about pray from the scammer. So I got the scammer's email, and my response was, "Hi, Mrs. Muta. I am always interested in helping those less fortunate. What is it you wish to discourse me?" Now, of course, discourse me came from the fact that Mrs. Muta said, let me see, there is something which I wish to discourse you. So I was merely parroting back the bad grammar. Did you catch the mistake in the first sentence? Yeah, there was a mistake. I did this on purpose because I wanted to feed Mrs. Muta back some bad grammar. So here's, I am always interested in helping those less fortunate. Less fortunate than whom? That was an incomplete comparison. And this is something that is so common. We say things all the time, about, well, my car is faster. Faster than what? That is not a whole sentence. When you are using words that imply comparison, words like less, words like faster, you need to state the rest of the comparison. So the mistake here is, I am always interested in helping those less fortunate than myself, or less fortunate than the people in your country, Mrs. Muta, because I'm pretty sure it's not England. Whatever. Incomplete comparisons. Very easy to avoid, but you have to know that it's a mistake. And the problem is, I don't think people are being taught that a comparison, okay, yes, I got you back, that a comparison must have two parts. I think that this has sort of fallen by the wayside. But in order for that sentence to be correct, I had to throw something else in there, and I did not. So let's leave on that note, or no, perhaps I should say let's let on that note. And let's take a look at our minute of nice, calm, serene sunsets, which is courtesy of JLS. And I will see you all on Friday. Have a great couple of days.